In terms of international political economy, there is the general intention of maintaining an international financial architecture. This order is provided by the various global economic governance institutions, such as the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. The role of these institutions is to regulate and advise on the economic policies of a state, thus aiding its development. However, these organizations are not completely independent, as they are dominated by major Western powers, more prominently the USA. They use the institutions to impose their neoliberal dogmas wherever they can, especially in third world countries with political and economic instability.
This one and many other controversies regarding those institutions can be traced back to 1944 with the Bretton Woods Conference. It was a meeting held by the Allied forces, notoriously the UK and the US. The delegations of those powers were represented by economists John Maynard Keynes and Harvey Dexter White. World War II was about to end, and the imminent victors had to scheme the new international economic order. Both thinkers diverged in their policies, as Keynes favored the implementation of distributive mechanisms to adjust uneven development through the world, while Dexter White proposed a liberal system based on the American economic hegemony. You can guess which approach prevailed. Let's take a look at the key objectives of the conference. First, establishing a new fixed exchange rate based on the dollar, putting it as the basic means of expansion for developing countries and undermining the domestic expansion of those countries, as the treaty considered their currencies as non-convertible. Then, the creation of the various institutions I mentioned before. Originally, there were credit mechanisms to provide loans for development in states. The IMF was mainly funded by US money, and your degree of relevance in the organization is determined by the size of your wealth and your contributions. Contrarily to the Keynesian values of balanced and global development, the IMF didn't focus on structural reforms to secure development, but rather on small funding to maintain US control over third world areas. It was also granted conditionality, which means it could shape the domestic policies of countries to favor foreign investment. The World Bank was initially created as a representation of Keynes' ideals, but as it was US funded, it didn't provide much help to third world countries until the 60s, when they were put under pressure by the UN. Lastly, the conference accorded the creation of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which evolved to what we know today as the World Trade Organization. It sought to bind countries to free trade agreements to submit them into their neoliberal policies of deregulation and privatization. Those three measures enabled the American government to complement their corrosive Cold War policies, often characterized with military intervention, with economic forms of coercion towards third world countries. However, in the decades of the 60s and 70s, this American economic hegemony began to crumble as the third world managed to counter it by implementing their own institutions. They used the UN General Assembly as their main tool to try to work aside from the Bretton Woods institutions, as the southern peripheral countries are more numerous and managed to organize themselves to make their own development agenda. They created various intergovernmental organizations to counter the power of the US, like the UNDP or the non-aligned movement. Also, the US dollar exchange rate with gold was severely devalued during that time. That, and many other factors, such as the humiliating defeat in Vietnam, undermined the position of the US as a global economic power. With this new international economic panorama, the IMF and the World Bank started developing structural adjustment reforms under the leadership of Robert McNamara, focusing their actions on the third world, eliminating political obstacles to reach a global free trade system, thus acquiring a prominent neoliberal nature. Now we have a new role for the economic governance institutions, based on the indoctrination of neoliberal policies in regions which may present an economic threat or an opportunity to the US economy, like the emerging power of Asia. The main tool to undermine efforts on regional development is to promote competitiveness and market free trade, the same arguments that are used in favor of the infamous TTIP. Finally, we have the World Trade Organization as the latest institution to contain the various menaces to the prevailing global economic order. They use two legal mechanisms to do so: the Agreements on Trade-related investment measures, which allowed the entrance of foreign investment from corporations, and agreements on trade-related intellectual property rights, which, through legal procedures, increased the price of technology in third world countries. Therefore, we got strong reasons not to trust these organizations in terms of international political economy, as they favor the wealthiest states and pretend to be impartial in front of the international community. However, experts claim that the new policies are being developed in those institutions to have a more global influence exclusively based on the Keynesian doctrines and not in a neoliberal dogma. Anyway, in my humble opinion, it seems that there is not a strong will to make effective reforms, as there is an interest from global economic governance institutions to keep favoring unbalanced development in Western economic hegemony for the final triumph of the New World Order.